No, I almost let you die. I nearly trot off and let you and her and your young become lunch for some ghouls. Yeah, sure. No problem. No big deal for me, I said with a grimace. Are you heading south? Mm-hmm, the brown mare said with an enthusiastic nod. The eggheads have a bounty for books, 100 caps for any pre-war book that's undamaged. It's tough to find books that aren't pulped, though. Well, I fought a bunch of ghouls a little bit ago, between here and the college. If you hurry, it should be clear still. I looked at the brown mare's rifles. You want to trade rifle rounds for shotgun shells? 20s? The pink unicorn asked hopefully. I shook my head. 12s. We don't have many 12 gauges, the unicorn said as she levitated out a half-full cardboard box. Just buckshot. I'll trade you 30 rounds of hunting ammo for them. Almost 2 for 1, but who was using math? We've also got fresh food from the Enclave, the brown unicorn added. I felt a chill go down my spine. I'll buy every bit you have. 3 bullets each, I said without hesitation. I had plenty of ammo, and hopefully they hadn't eaten any of it. Looking confused, they agreed. The 4 hurried to the south, eager to get to the shelter of the eggheads. I waited till they disappeared in the fog and dumped 4 apples, 3 carrots, and a head of lettuce into the mud. Then, narrowing my eyes, I smashed them all into mush. Maybe they weren't contaminated. I wasn't going to take that risk. I wasn't going to let there be another 99. Checking my shotgun, I continued my path north. The fog never lifted so much as thinned and tattered swirls of chest-high banks. The mucky, broken road under hoof sloshed with every step. This area had a different feel from the ruins around Riverside. There were smaller homes of stone and rotten wood instead of the large apartment buildings. Upscale, but not nearly as extravagant as Blue Blood Manor. This region hadn't suffered a direct hit from a bomb, but there was more than enough radiation in the water to prohibit long-term habitation. Oh yeah, and there were leeches. Every few minutes I'd have to flick them off my barding with the sword. Their chiseled teeth gnawed at the ceramic plates, and every now and then they were tenacious enough to get at my hide underneath it. It didn't matter how many of the things I killed. More were always wiggling through the water. Thorny briar wounds around the stones, and there were strange mushrooms growing in the cracks. Deep croaks periodically shouted out, making me jump. The skitter of rad roaches and the buzz of bloatflies were everywhere. I'd finally found a place around Hoofington teeming with wildlife, and all I wanted to do was balefire bomb it. Wait, teeming with life? I paused, feeling something nibbling at my hoof. Maybe a little bit of glory had rubbed off on me, but I levitated out a healing potion and held it up to my eye. In my experience, a healing potion only lasted a few days after being brewed by a unicorn with healing spells. It'd been a milky purple when I'd purchased it. 3 hours later, I expected the color to fade a little, or maybe for it to become transparent. Instead, I found it still a milky purple. I looked to the west. Here, it was impossible to tell where the river ended and where the marsh began, but the black towers of the core were still visible. Conventional wisdom was that enervation was the result of magical contamination, that too many experiments and spells and bombs and worse had just created this energy that sucked the life out of everything. If it didn't kill you, it'd sicken you till something else did. But what kind of accidents or magic contamination could have produced that cave with enervation so strong it made Glory's wings simply drop off? Ow. I lifted my hoof to see the black leech the size of my horn chewing at the base of my hoof. Flicking it off with the sword, and battling its friends off as well, I kept moving. My depth perception was lousy. Past 20 or so feet, I was all right, and inside 3 feet, I could guesstimate. But between those two, things were off. I wondered if it'd been the taint that got into my eye, or the enervation. The enervation was strongest within the core. Maybe something had happened that made it originate there? The magic shields or something reacting when the megaspells went off on the city? Maybe one of those megaspells had been an enervation spell? Except Chapel, the arena, this bog, they were practically next door to the core, but had green things still growing. Meanwhile, places like Frankfurt were miles and miles from the city, but were virtually sterilized by the enervation fields. Could a megaspell nuke the city core itself and splash across the entire area at random? I couldn't envision it. And one would think that after 2 centuries, the enervation fields would weaken. It would require some sort of heavy-duty megaspell level magic to keep them going after all this time. But I never hear DJ Pony talking about enervation away from Hoofington, so it's not something natural either. I rubbed my eye patch. Maybe having my brains rotting was making me smarter? How's that for irony? If it's not accidental, and not something that happened in the core, there must be some other source of enervation, but what? Even my taint-riddled brain wasn't figuring that out. Then there was a splash as a frog twice the size of my hoof landed next to me. It swam onto a grimy rock and climbed atop it, facing me with green glowing eyes as it let out a low croak. "Ribbit to you too," I muttered and kept walking. It followed, hopping from rock to rock as it kept pace with me. I stopped, it stopped. I moved, it moved. Okay, as Scotch would say, creepiness factor rising. My mane was giving it about a 6.2 on the itchiness factor. I let out another long, low croak, and 2 more swam over to climb onto the stones. These 2 were even larger than the first. In unison, they let out another loud croak. Creepiness factor approaching shooty levels. Then a pair of briar bushes were shoved aside, and a massive frog, easily the size of 4 ponies, pushed out its head. It croaked, and then opened its mouth wide, long yellow fangs glistening as its tongue shot out and connected with my barding. It stuck fast, and I was nearly dragged completely off my hooves as the muscle contracted. My hooves slid through the muck towards that pony-sized maw. I do not need this right now! Sword met tongue in desperate slashes, but the flesh was almost as tough as a cable. I'd nearly been dragged completely into its mouth before the tongue had severed. Steadying myself, I brought the shotgun up and blasted it, but the peppering darts didn't seem to do more than irritate the monstrous frog. Its bloody tongue disappeared into its mouth, and, with an enormous splash, it latched itself into the air. If the meal doesn't come to the froggy... My braces clattered as I barely staggered aside and reloaded shrapnel. These didn't appear much better than buckshot. As I watched, yellow bile seemed to ooze from the frog's wounds, and they were healing almost before my eyes. Okay, shotgun wasn't working. I couldn't get enough range for the rifle, and I had no idea where his weak points might be. Crap. The giant frog gave a short hop and rammed me. The yellow ichor burned where it touched, and I kept moving back more and more. The water was getting deeper, and it was moving me around towards the river, its bulbous green eyes never leaving me. It knew exactly what it was doing. Once I was swimming more than walking, I'd be easy prey. Well, since they were the only things I could see, I slipped into sats and targeted a blast in each round eye. But as I fired, its eyes retracted into the critter's skull. "Cheater!" I yelled, and pulled off a hoof-sized leech, then tossed it into its mouth. It bit down, and I watched the black slug nearly liquefy instantly in its acidic spittle. Glad I hadn't tried the let it eat me and shoot it from the inside plan. Not good, I said as I tossed leech after leech into its mouth. Okay, technically this was feeding rather than fighting, but so long as I wasn't eating myself, I was still okay. I even managed to scramble into shallower water, but the giant frog looked like it was getting bored with appetizers. Its tongue flashed out again and smushed against my chest, the tip fully healed. I dug in my hooves, but it simply waddled towards me, ignoring my frantic shots. "Get down!" My ears swiveled behind me. It couldn't be. Thump. I dropped into the muck as a grenade flew over my back and into its mouth. Its eyes bulged. Then it exploded in a great bloody chunks. I rose from the churned water, a leech wiggling across my face, looking for something to bite, for a second before I tossed it aside. Then I looked back behind me at P-21, walking through the chest-deep muck. He slung persuasion as he trotted through the muck at me. "Are you okay?" P-21 asked as he put a hoof on my shoulder. I stared at him for a long moment, then hugged him close. "I thought you were doing the smart thing and going back to chapel," I sniffed. He flushed, looking away. "You're not the only one who's allowed to do stupid things." "But—" I looked around at all the mud and fog around us. "How did you find me?" "I didn't," he said, softly. "She did." I looked back at Scotch tape rising from some rushes, looking at her pip-buck sheepishly. She looked shaky and scared, but trying to keep a brave face. "Well, like you said, we're all messed up. I just didn't think you should be, messed up alone." I looked at the rest of the weeds and thorns. "Is Rampage?" "Staying behind with Glory and Lacuna," P-21 finished. Then he bowed his head as he pressed his lips together. Finally, he said softly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was weak." I stared at him, and some hateful, petty part of me wanted to rub it in, hurt him. 4 little ponies went to work beating the living snot out of that shameful part of me as I walked to him and nudged his shoulder with a smile. "You weren't weak. You were smart. Being around me will get you killed." We trot back to Scotch. "Any pony can die," Scotch Tape muttered as she looked at the murky water beneath us. "Even Mom wasn't safe in the stable." "But I led you into those tunnels. It's my fault." "You led, Blackjack. We followed. You didn't make us do anything." He took a deep breath. "Chapel will be there when we're done. Till then, well..." He gave a shy smile and a helpless little shrug. Then he blinked as he caught the look of disgust on my face. "What?" Then he looked at the matching expression of Scotch Tape's muzzle. "What is it?" He suddenly blinked and his eyes went flat. "There's a leech on my butt, isn't there?" We nodded slowly. "More than one?" Another nod. "Big ones?" "Uh-huh," Scotch said weakly. He looked back. A blood-curdling cry echoed through the mire. "We have got to get you some decent barding," I muttered, launching the black bloodsuckers back into the mist. Once we had them all off his rear, Scotch Tape hopped onto his back and we continued north, passing by the corpse of a giant frog. A dozen smaller amphibians were already having a cannibalistic feast. "Enjoy your lunch," I called out to them. "Thanks." One of the larger ones croaked in reply. I think that all 3 of our manes stood on end before we raced away from the scene as fast as my clattering legs would carry me.